What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So today's video, we are going to be working on my E46 station wagon. What we're going to be doing today is addressing an issue that I've had for a while with this car, and it's actually somewhat common with these vehicles, especially with the age of this one. I got almost 195,000 miles on this car. I have play in my steering. So when I say that, I mean driving straight down the road, you want to turn or change lanes on the highway or something like that, there's a lot of play in my steering before it actually does anything. Now that could be one of two things. It could either be the steering rack itself is physically worn out, which is definitely a possibility due to the age of the vehicle. But the other thing it could be is this system is all pretty much hard joints through the steering column and through the firewall and through the engine bay, but right at the end of the intermediate shaft in the engine bay is a bushing that attaches to the steering intermediate shaft, and then this end on this side attaches to the steering rack itself. This bushing is supposed to absorb road vibrations and stuff like that and give you, acceptable road feel without being too harsh. This bushing gets a lot of stress put on it. It's in the engine bay. It's exposed to a lot of heat on a regular basis. When you're in parking lots doing turning and stuff like that, backing out of a parking spot, then turning the wheel to get, facing the right direction before you take off, there's a lot of stress put on this because it's very difficult at that point when you're turning the wheels. So this thing gets a lot of twisting force put on it, and it's also old. You think about this car is 2003, or it's almost 18 years old, almost 19 years old by the production date. So this piece is most likely worn out. It might not be broken, cracked, or anything like that, but the rubber is probably a lot softer than this newer one is. So we're going to go over replacing this today. Normally you would want to have the car up in the air on a lift, access it from underneath, because you can actually see the steering shaft where it goes into the steering rack relatively easily from underneath. I am going to attempt to replace it from up top, just because I don't really feel like trying to get this car up in the air and get underneath it and try to do it that way, because I don't like rolling around on the floor. So I'm gonna attempt to replace from up top. I'm pretty sure that you can. I'm gonna walk you guys through that if it's possible. If I get partway through and I find out that it's not possible to do it that way, then I will go through the process of picking the car up and we will get it replaced from underneath. Either way, I'm gonna walk you guys through getting that replaced today. So let's get to it. All right, so we're up front in the engine bay. I want to point out to you guys where this is at so you have an idea of where you're looking to and what you're trying to take apart. Right down there, I don't know how easy it is to see. You can see the rack and you can see the end of that joint right past the motor mount when you're looking through here. That is the joint itself where it screws onto the rack. The actual bolt that pinches it together right now is currently facing towards the engine block. What we're going to do once we get everything torn down into there and we get figured out what's got to come out in order to do this job, I'm going to turn the wheel so that we can get access to that bolt from this direction. But obviously starting out, we're going to have to take our air box out. We're going to have to take, in my instance, I'm going to have to take my strut tower bar out to get stuff in this area out of the way. And then to get to the back half of that steering column or that steering intermediate shaft where it goes to attaches at the firewall, I'm gonna have to take out all of this cowling as well as the plastic piece here that blocks off the area where the brake booster is. So I'm gonna walk you guys through how to take all of this stuff apart just so you know, and then I'm gonna show you guys how to get that steering shaft out of there. You can do the job of replacing that coupler without taking the steering shaft completely out if you want to, but I'm gonna take it out just so I can take it out of the car and show you guys, what you're doing and how to replace it. It makes my life easier, demonstrating things. So I'm gonna get started taking things apart and we're gonna get down to that steering shaft. All right, so I got everything ripped apart in here just so I could show you guys. Like I said, you don't have to do it this way. You don't have to take all the stuff out. You can actually just take it off at the steering rack and take it off at the end of the steering shaft. I'm gonna take the actual whole steering shaft off just to show you guys how to do this. But this right here that I'm pointing at is actually the steering shaft, and you can see the bolt end there where the one half of that joint goes on, and then the other end of that joint is right here on this side of the engine mount. So that's your joint down there, right underneath the engine mount bracket there. And then you see that it goes up here and it kind of goes underneath this piece of body here. If you reach up underneath over here in this area here where my hand is at, you can actually feel that steering shaft where it's going through the firewall, and there's a Torx bolt on it, and I believe it is an E10. I will correct myself here in the video if I'm incorrect, but that's how you take the steering shaft off at the firewall. I do want to warn you guys, I'm pretty sure from past experience that if you take this off, that the steering shaft or the steering column itself where it comes to the steering wheel can actually push back through this firewall. Once this is out, this is kind of keeping it from, this whole assembly being attached to it is keeping it from going back through. So just be careful when you're trying to go back together with this joint here at the top if you decide to go this way, because it can give you problems pushing the steering shaft back onto the column itself. As far as stuff here that's coming apart, to get to it this way, your air box, 210s here, you take your trim piece off for your fresh air, your cold air into the air box. There's a screw clamp on the air intake boot here, along with this plug connection that you take off. And then once you get that off, we're taking our cowl out. That's T30s in there that hold it to the cowl back there. As you guys saw in the time lapse, how to take all that stuff apart up there. Then once you get all this stuff out, there's normally 2 push clips here on there's one here on this on the body here, as well as one back there in that trim piece that are supposed to be like twist locks. My car was missing both of them, but they're the same style twist locks as the ones holding this cover on for the microfilter. You just turn them 90 degrees and pull them out of these little locking tabs here, and then you pull this. You're going to take your brake booster hose out of the brake booster, and then you pull your hoses and your wiring up, and you can maneuver that trim piece, this trim piece here, up and out of there. Once you get that trim piece out of there, we're going to take our variable intake runner valve out. That goes into the side of the intake manifold like this and has 2 T40 screws holding it on in those 2 spots that you see there. Unplug the plug connection, take the 2 T40 screws out, and you pull this out. And then once you get that out, you're taking your air boot out. Your air boot has 2 worm gear style clamps on it. Normally they're facing towards the bottom if nobody's ever worked on your car before, so it's kind of a pain to get to them. Mine, I've had it on and off before, and I refaced them towards the top so I can get to them, but it is either a flat blade screwdriver or a 1/4 inch socket to get those off. A 1/4 inch actual socket, not the drive, the actual 1/4 inch size. So air intake boot's out, and we're to this point here where we can see everything. So I'm going to work on getting that steering shaft up and out of there so that I can show you guys how to replace that joint. All right, so before undoing any of the bolts that hold your steering shaft and stuff in, first thing you're going to want to do is turn your steering wheel that far from dead center, wheels pointing straight. You can see my wheels are pointed just a little bit. That'll give you access to the 2 screws on the joint at the steering rack, as well as access to the screw at the top where it goes into the part that comes through the firewall. And then another tip is to use your seatbelt to lock your steering wheel, because when you take all that stuff off, your steering column itself where it comes through the firewall is then free to spin and do whatever it wants to do, and you don't want to get it off to where the steering rack is. So lock your steering wheel. It's going to have a little play in it, but it's tight enough right now that it's not going to be off when I go to put everything back together. So once your steering wheel is turned like that and locked, if you look down here, you can see that I have undone that screw right there on the back. Sorry guys. On the back of that steering coupler. And then I've also undone the screw on this side as well, right there. So you can see that I can see both of them. This one I came through from like over here with a long extension, and then that one I actually just got from over here on the side of this steering, or the engine mount bracket itself. Those are both E10s. Another tip that I can give you guys is if you're in a tight area and you can't get an E10 socket on, a 8mm 12-point wrench or ratcheting wrench or something like that, like either that short one or this longer one, will fit those E10s and not strip them out and be able to break the bolts loose. So I use these on the one that's facing towards the engine, that's on the top half of that joint, and then I just used a swivel socket and an extension to get the one that's down there at the rack itself. So now that I've got those two out, I'm gonna pull the steering shaft out of that coupler and pull that coupler off of there. All right, so I fibbed to you guys a little bit. I'm actually not going to take the whole steering shaft out because I was able to take the coupler out relatively easily, and I can show you guys visually here outside of the car what I did. So if you look down there, that is the steering shaft, and on the end of it there is like a, almost looks like a flat blade screwdriver point to the end of it, and then on the side that's facing us currently, there's a notch in it. That is the notch that the bolt went through to keep the steering shaft itself from sliding out of that joint, even if the bolt comes loose, because it's actually a pinch style joint, but it has a redundancy so that if for some reason things loosen up, the bolt would have to back completely out in order for that steering shaft to come out. And then once I took that shaft, this steering intermediate shaft is actually like collapsible. It has like a slide joint in it. It's a little difficult to slide up, and you're gonna have to put a lot of force into it to get it to go towards the firewall to come out. But I was able to get it to pull up and pull out of the coupler while the coupler was still sitting on the steering rack. And then I just pulled the coupler off of the end of the steering rack. And I have some good news. I was thoroughly surprised to find this actually. This coupler actually has play in it. I don't know if I'll be able to show you guys here. You can actually see this rivet right here is completely loose, and the whole coupler, so you guys can hear it, is actually knocking back and forth. It's just this side. This is actually the steering shaft input side of it. So this is the way it would sit in the car. The way you're looking at it in the car is just like this. That steering shaft comes in here. You can see that it's got two flats on it. There's no way to put it in the wrong way. And then there's one side of it that has like a semicircle groove cut in it. That side, it faces up towards this spot where the bolt goes through. And like I said, that semicircle is, the bolt goes into that semicircle, and even if this bolt came loose, it would have to come completely out of the threads in order for this steering shaft to pull out. And then even on top of that, this steering shaft doesn't pull out that easy. So there's a lot of safety built into this, that no matter what happens, if you forget a bolt or something like that, it's very, very difficult for this to fall out. But just make sure that you're putting all your stuff back when you're going back together. And then this one on the other side is actually spline drive, and in the middle of this slot there's a plastic like trim piece. It's like a seal or like a gasket or like a cover for the top of the steering rack. It actually slides up into this slot, so you can't put this on wrong either. You can put it off by a tooth either direction, but what happens is when you put it off by a tooth, because of the fact that this slot is here and that plastic trim piece is on there, it's actually really, really hard to put onto the steering rack when you put it off by a tooth, and you will have to fight it to get it to go on there. If you put it on there and you have to fight it to get it to go on there, it's crooked and it's not lined up properly. If you put it on there and it slides right into place, you're good. You can also double check after you put things back together by turning this a little bit more and looking at this and making sure that the plastic trim that comes up through this groove at this end doesn't have like a weird curve or like isn't wavy or anything like that, and make sure that it's in this slot straight, because if it's got any kind of weird curve to it, it means that the steering shaft itself is off by a tooth at the rack. So I'm happy that we found that this is messed up. I'm going to get my new part put in, and we're going to get everything put back together, and we're going to see how much better our steering play is. I just wanted to show you guys going back together. Like I said, there should be no resistance to you pushing this coupler back on. See how easy I can slide this up and down? If you tried to put it on crooked, it would not slide up and down on this as easily as it does. You would be having to push it on, hammer it on, you know, do all kinds of crazy stuff. So just make sure when you're putting it on that it slides up and down really easily, and that means you're lined up. And this is that plastic, this guy right here is in the middle of that slot on that coupler, and that's what keeps it from going on crooked. That's actually kind of like a little alignment tab. And if you try to put it on crooked, or you do actually get it on crooked, when you look at that tab, when that tab is facing up towards you, it will be all wavy or crooked or on an angle. So it'll be hard to put on crooked. Just make sure that it's easy to slide on and off like this, and everything will be put back together straight. And then the other side, the way it's designed, is almost impossible to, I'm sure you could probably put it in 180 degrees out, but the bolt wouldn't go through. So I'm gonna get that steering shaft down there, put back onto that steering coupler, and we are gonna get everything buttoned up and be done with this job. One last thing I want to show you guys before going back together with everything. Remember I told you that plastic thing that goes up between? See how that plastic all the way down there, like right underneath the flashlight? That's actually the universal joint. See the slot in the middle of it? The plastic doesn't have any weird, like, it's not crooked, it doesn't have any weird waves or anything in it. That's how you want to put it back together, because that's straight. As long as your alignment was in beforehand, your car will drive straight. There's probably going to be a little bit off, especially if you had a loose steering joint like I did, because it's obviously aligned with the loose steering joint, so you might have to get the car realigned. But it should drive relatively straight and shouldn't cause you any kind of weird tire wear issues or anything like that. So I just wanted to show you guys that. I'm going to put the bolt back in that. I'm going to get the rest of this stuff here put back together, and I'm going to show you guys the steering wheel and how whether or not there's any play left in it. All right, so I got everything buttoned up front. I will put a link in the description down below, or down below, as well as I'll put a little picture at the end of the video for the torque specs for the bolts on that steering coupler, so you guys can torque those properly. I just wanted to show you guys my actual steering wheel play post replacing that steering coupler. Before, you guys saw at the beginning of the video, when I would play with the wheel like this, there would be a lot of back and forth play that didn't look like it had a lot of resistance to it, and it didn't. You'd be able to wiggle the wheel and it would bounce back and forth between two hard spots, and those hard spots were actually it starting to turn the steering wheel. So now that I've replaced that coupler, you guys saw that coupler, it has a lot of play in it. I don't have any play. The steering wheel feels stiff. It feels like it's activating the rack immediately. There's no play in my steering anymore. So that fixed my problem. If you guys go through this repair, or you get your vehicle yourself torn apart and it doesn't have play in that steering coupler, and you still have that kind of play, the only other thing that it could be is going to be the steering rack. That is normally caused by wear in the gears and the rack itself. That happens on higher mileage vehicles, just wear and tear, hard driving, you know, a combination of things. But if the steering coupler is not your problem, the steering rack isn't going to be the only other thing that would fix that. I do want to tell you guys, before jumping to conclusions and replacing random things, make sure that your ball joints and your tie rods don't have any play in them, because that suspension components like that can also cause that to feel like that as well. I knew going into this that I didn't have any worn suspension components, so I was, you know, I had to go at something else or figure out what the other problem was. Obviously, we found it for my case, but make sure your guys' steering and suspension stuff in the front is all tight before trying to figure out anything else that might be causing that loose steering wheel issue. If you guys have any questions about this video, please comment down below. Be sure to answer any questions you guys have. I also want to let you guys know that I set up a Patreon page. I would really appreciate it if you guys just go over there and become patrons. It helps me out, it helps the channel out, it allows me to buy equipment and editing software and, you know, stuff to make better videos for you guys. Just, it helps me out. I would really appreciate if you go over there. You'll see everything on there. There's a couple different options you guys have. You pick what you want to, but anything that you do helps me out. I would also appreciate it if you guys subscribe to the YouTube channel. That also helps me out. Leave a like on this video if this helped you. Other than that, we're done with this repair for the day. So I'll see you guys later.